All right, Federico Puente as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. So you're an international nuclear expert and you're joining me today from Mexico?
Yes, thank you very much, Naomi. Thank you very much for this unique space. And I should firstly congratulate you, Brett, all the team for the amazing and fantastic work that you are doing.
Oh, you're too kind. We're happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about the international part of your title. How many countries have you lived in?
Well, I live, study, and work in 5 different countries: Mexico, Spain, Germany, Sweden, and the US. Um, I was born in Mexico. My half of my family is Spanish and half of my family is Mexican. That probably explains a lot why I have spent half of my time in Mexico, and the other half is funny because it's been between Europe and the US. I have always been moving focus on my interest in nuclear. So that has been actually the main driver for me to move all around these different countries.
So you grew up in one place. You grew up in Mexico?
In Mexico and in Spain. In Mexico, I was most of the time, but my mom is from Barcelona. So we were spending a lot of time with the family there. So it was always like a mix. But and I enjoy it a lot.
Which one did you like better, Mexico or Spain?
Both. I would say both.
You can't take favorites. And then you came to the US to do your university?
Yes, I actually moved also quite young. My mom moved to the US when I was probably 16 or 15 years old.
And why'd she move?
She moved there because of work, and also she got married with my American stepdad. And I went to live to the US, to Texas, actually.
Oh, what part of Texas? I'm moving to Houston.
Really?
In a month. Yeah.
It's an amazing city. And later on, I studied Penn State. So it was a complete different state. I went from very hot and humid weather to the snow and cold northeast of the US.
Yeah.
Always because nuclear. So that's more or less how my time in the US.
So how did you know that you wanted to go to Penn State for nuclear engineering?
It's actually a very long story. It going backwards. When I made my Master of Science degree, that is actually called Sustainable Energy Engineering, but it's focused on nuclear power technology. These are, I like to always make this emphasis on these keywords: sustainable energy engineering, and I focus on nuclear power because in some parts of the world, nuclear is considered as it is, a sustainable energy source. So when I did the master, I wanted to start working. I wanted to first work, have some experience, and then decided if I wanted to go or not for a PhD. Thanks to my master thesis advisors, I got in contact with the US universities, and particularly this great professor at Penn State. But I went first to work. I was in Sweden. I finished the master thesis in Westinghouse. I was in a very small town called Västerås, and they needed somebody that could speak Spanish to go to Spain. I said, well, my Spanish is not so good, but I can give it a try. And I moved to Spain to inside Westinghouse, but providing services to the MPP. I was there
Nuclear power plant?
Sorry?
MPP? NPP? You'll have to spell out all the acronyms.
Yes, sorry, you're right. To the nuclear power plant, I moved to Vandellós 2, nuclear power plant that is actually in the south of Barcelona. It's like an hour and a half. It's in the province of Tarragona. It's an amazing power plant, an amazing region. And we were providing services. So that was, I wanted to have some experience. So besides all the design, all the modeling, all the theoretical understanding, to be as well in the nuclear power plant, to see how things were moving, the work itself. And I was there. I was actually, Spain, it's a wonderful place to live. I was there over a year. And it was quite difficult to take the decision to go for a PhD. But I thought it's now or never if I don't take the time now. And I moved to Penn State because I actually at the time thought it was the best university program for what I was looking for, this combination of nuclear that they were having, the very important projects. Actually, my project was with the competitors from Westinghouse, IAEA, at that time. So I was 8 months in the US in State College at Penn State, and 4 months in Erlangen.
Where is that?
Germany. It's a small town in Germany. It's towards the southeast, so to say. And that's where Siemens built, so to say, the city, this big German company. But Areva, or Arriba, depending how people pronounce it, had just bought the nuclear power section of Siemens in Erlangen. So for me, it was perfect because it was a project that was 8 months in the US and 4 months in Europe.
Right.
I was actually getting the best of both worlds. And I was getting this combination of research and academics in the US and of practice at the company, at Arriba. And I spent like this 4 years at that time.
It's amazing.
So that's how I end up at Penn State.
Yeah, and I have to ask, so you do your master's through Westinghouse and your PhD through Arriva. How does one go about doing that? Like, do you just apply for a job at Westinghouse and then they were like, oh, do you also want to get a master's, or how did that work?
It was the other way around. I was actually first accepted in the master's program. So it was an international Master of Science program.
Oh, wow.
I was very lucky to get in. We had, I believe, 1 year and a half of courses. It was this sustainable energy engineering program was basically divided in power generation, sustainable power generation, and sustainable energy utilization. I focus on the sustainable power generation. Within that, nuclear power. And when I finished the courses, actually a little bit before, we had to design or propose a thesis project. And I wanted to get to do something as real as it could be.
Right.
So I applied to different nuclear power plants in Sweden. And I applied to Westinghouse, Sweden. I was really lucky, one of the few ones that got accepted into this Westinghouse, Sweden. We were 2 students. And
just 2 of you in the program?
Yes. From all the program, probably there were very few that went into nuclear. And from the ones that we were in nuclear, yes, there were many applications at Westinghouse, but just two got into this Westinghouse project.
Amazing.
And I did a thesis. I stayed working there because I actually wanted to stay in Sweden. I actually wanted to work. I was in love with the place. It's a beautiful country.
Yeah.
That actually, at that time, 50% of the electricity was produced with nuclear and 50% with hydropower. So, and nuclear.
Of the country, 50% of the, wow.
Yeah. And there was a lot of emphasis on the sustainability of nuclear. And I actually wanted to stay there just because they needed somebody with some little Spanish in Spain. That's how I moved. And but even before that, that's how it's good that you ask. Before I arrived to Sweden, I didn't know anything about Sweden. And I actually was following the program. That was the master program that I liked the most. Mm-hmm. Then I start learning about the country itself. When I was in Mexico, I studied economics and mechanical and electrical engineering. I studied actually both at the same time because I was accepted at the economics program. I actually wanted sustainable development. And I was always focused on that. And then I got the scholarship for this other university. So I decided, let's go for both. It was a lot of work.
Why not?
It was a lot of work. But it was a nice adventure. I finished both of them. And I wanted, in mechanical and electrical engineering, I was focused on sustainability as well. Mm-hmm. And I like a lot renewables. But I always thought we need something that complements renewables. Yeah. Renewables are great, but we need a big player. We need something that can provide massive amounts of clean energy. And that's how I focus in nuclear, and I end up in Sweden.
So I wonder, and it's straying a little bit from your personal background, but on the topic of renewables needing a complement, what made you go to nuclear versus thinking, I'm going to put all my energy into developing battery storage and make renewables not need a complement?
It was, I was so impressed when I arrived in Sweden with the whole area of nuclear. It's massive amount of energy that is produced per fuel. There's actually no other energy source that can produce so much electricity per unit of fuel. That was one. The second one, that it's clean energy. During production, of course, there's no generation of greenhouse gases. If you consider the whole life cycle, as it should be considered, of all the technologies, all renewables, like the construction, transportation, and so on, nuclear is actually one of the lowest emissions. That was the other one. That was affordable. It's amazing. Yes, we do need high amounts of energy initially. The capital investment is huge.
Right.
But the variable costs are quite low. The levelized cost of the electricity produced by nuclear is very competitive. So I was also impressed by that, by the amount of energy, that it was affordable, and that it was not depending on the energy conditions, on the weather conditions. Like, this was an energy mature, safe. Safe is number one priority, but that could operate during storms, during very difficult weather conditions. It could provide electricity on demand. And for me, what was very important now that you mentioned renewables is that nuclear could be used as a base load, that nuclear is dispatchable. For me, it's perfect this combination between nuclear as a base load technology and renewables as this source that can provide for the extra peaks when needed, when actually the weather conditions allowed it. Because that would be the perfect sustainable power portfolio and diversified. Not all the countries can have this. So actually we have to base our decision on facts. It can be more than promoting something. Our decision has to be well justified on facts.
Right.
Storage. Storage makes sense. Probably a lot of people here will kill me from renewables, but storage makes sense in small grids. That's when it starts becoming efficient. In very big grids, interconnections, the grid itself is the one that distributes the energy where it's needed. So, and nuclear can actually follow demand. So in some very big grids, talking about now the technical parts or the advantages and disadvantages or the technicalities of these, very big grids, storage is very difficult to prove efficiency because you can actually distribute the electricity, what is being produced when it is being needed with interconnections, with following the demand and so on. For very small grids, storage starts making sense. And that's one. Second, it's extremely expensive. When we talk about storage, we have to talk about short term, middle term, long term. Is this a seasonal thing? It starts becoming so expensive. I'm not saying it's not a part of the solution, but we have to think actually in a very complex manner to provide a very strategic solution. The energy of the future is not that it's nuclear, it's not that it's solar, it's not that it's wind. It's a mix of all of them. The clue here is that they should not leave us out nuclear.
Yeah.
Climate change is a priority. It's one of the greatest challenges. We have to focus on the current generations and the future generations. But it's a reality that we are very far away from the goals set by the different climate conferences and so on. Nuclear, unfortunately, has been left out without a reason of these energy talks. And it's strange to me because environmentalists, sometimes renewable people, sometimes people that are unfortunately against nuclear, consider that is this fight between nuclear and renewable. I don't see it that way. It should be a team. It's the perfect combination. It's like if we were fighting and the fossil people were laughing, they're saying, look, they are fighting between them. That's perfect. And,
they're keeping themselves busy fighting while we provide the energy.
Exactly. So we have, imagine, it's just like, it's a complex problem. We have this balance. On one side, we have the fossil fuels providing most of the energy, polluting. We are trying these efforts with renewables, but we need these big players. to actually put the balance, to try to actually make a balance between the sustainable sources, that means nuclear plus renewables, and against fossil. If one sees the facts, based on facts, again, most of the avoided greenhouse gas emissions has been basically hydro and nuclear. And nuclear is actually on the top. Yes, you can see renewables growing, but this is a combination. And you have to start including all of them, because here it's about avoiding. And not only avoiding, at some point, we have to start reversing.
Yes, we do.
So it's not like, oh, we stop and that's it. No. It's we solve the problem that we have not solved, and then we first mitigate. And then we go back to clean our mess.
Right. So I want to go back to a personal note, because you're so passionate about climate change, and it seems like sustainability, the idea of it has been there for you from the start of your actual education and time in the nuclear space. So what made you even think about sustainability? Did you grow up in a community that really appreciated it, or did you see something growing up that made you realize we need to change the way that we're acting and using our resources? Or what was it for you that really got you thinking about sustainability?
It's a very good question. Thank you. I think you got me there. I think it was a combination of factors. On one side, when I studied these both degrees simultaneously, one was at a public university and one at a private university. There was a huge difference between the problems of one university and the other one. I actually love to have had that experience, because it opened the way I was considering the different problems of the society, diversification, and so on. So I started focusing a lot on efficiency. Also because of living a lot of my time in Europe and in the US. In Europe, the space is quite limited compared to Mexico, compared to the US. And so I could see how efficient they were on designing systems by itself. So I focus a lot on trying to get more with the same, or even with less. So for me, it was so important, these combinations of being effective, efficient, inside sustainability. And at that time, sustainability, yes, it was something that was starting. So it was economic development, but then when you were considering sustainability, it was quite complicated how you were actually putting that into numbers, into these macroeconomic equations. How will you extend this concern to the society that climate or pollution has a cost, that not polluting has advantages? It was actually quite interesting to me. That's why I was always involved in economics. I was very focused on, my thesis was actually about nuclear as a sustainable option for Mexico at that time, including the externalities of different energy technologies, to prove that nuclear was actually competitive. Because if, of course, for some fossil fuels, if CO2 emissions are not if they don't put any price or any cost to CO2 emissions, then the cost of producing electricity is not the same and you leave renewables and nuclear out. But then when you put a cost to health, to the problems to society and so on, so I think I was always like very interested in including these economic variables to energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important because when we're talking, I'm thinking about Westinghouse and Areva, they're completely different than they used to be back when we worked for them. Westinghouse went bankrupt and Areva got bought out.
Yes.
So how do you see the nuclear industry right now from an economic perspective, its potential for growth in the future, maybe even focusing on its potential for growth in terms of numbers in the 5 countries that you've lived in?
I really think that, of course, we have the experienced countries and the newcomers, so to say. The experienced countries should actually, they have the potential to consider nuclear and to make it in a much easier, so to say, way, because they have the infrastructure compared to a newcomer country. Talking from an economical point of view, we have to make a project successful on budget and on time. You just mentioned 2 of the companies that I work in the past that have had problems with on budget and on time. I also work, by the way, for a technical safety organization and in Germany that was the scientific and technical distribution arm of the government and at the National Institute for Nuclear Research, but that here in Mexico. So I have seen these different sectors. So the private sector, the academics and research, and of course the government and the technical safety organization. But going back to your question, I really think that we have to make a successful project. We have to focus on a project that is on budget and on time. That can be done by actually one of the main problems of nuclear is this high initial capital cost. So for the long term, for any investor, there's a lot of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of uncertainty because I will provide a lot of money at the beginning. How will I guarantee that I get my investment back over the years? What if the policies change? So a mechanism has to be actually incorporated within the market or within the government. The government has to be quite involved. To my knowledge, I don't know a project that is only private, successful. Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, but I can be wrong. And these mechanisms can be on guaranteeing a special price. Some very successful, admirable people have actually designed these mechanisms for the UK. And it's amazing because this person is Mr. Gupta, designed a mechanism that actually he's very modest. So he actually always thanks his whole team. But personally, probably I think he was one of the guys with the main ideas of this contract with differences. And so if you provide these guarantees that the price will be maintained, you lower the uncertainties for the investors. You can actually do it with the government. The government can help with subsidize the sustainable sources, can help with the regulation, can help with many things. Of course, the regulatory body has to be completely independent from the government. But there's some mechanisms that actually can help can help nuclear achieve a successful project. At least on the Western side, it seems Russia and China have proven to work now on successful projects. So this is actually something that we have to take into consideration. But today we have to focus on improving a successful project for nuclear.
Right. And so you sort of mentioned that one of the barriers to proving a successful completion of a new build would be to get that initial investment. And that's because it's risky for investors to do that because, say, the government all of a sudden has a no nuclear policy and they completely cut it out as an option. How do we change that? I know you said make it a fixed price, but in terms of convincing our governments that we should subsidize nuclear and that we should keep nuclear in the energy portfolio, and especially, here in the US with the Green New Deal, actually having nuclear mentioned in the Green New Deal, who convinces the government of that? Whose job is that?
Thank you so much, Naomi, for these great questions. You have actually...
I'm trying to challenge you.
In a very chirurgical manner, you have approached very sensitive topics. The nuclear project, in order to make a sustainable nuclear program, several infrastructure issues have to be considered. So on one side, we have the economic, the funding and financing. On the other side, of course, we have the government, the government with the legal and regulatory framework. But one thing that you actually mentioned that is quite important is that sometimes, probably the very biggest challenge at the beginning is to consider nuclear as a sustainable solution in the energy portfolio. Why? They have to take this decision based on facts, to be objective and to be justified. But sometimes they are afraid of the political cost. They are afraid that nuclear is not popular. They are afraid that sometimes the population are not well informed about the advantages and about the benefits of this technology. So instead of jumping and trying to transmit these benefits and advantages to the public in a transparent, with commitment, clarifying and precise all these points, for understanding first the public perception and moving to the public acceptance. One of the main barriers that we have in nuclear is public acceptance. So yes, we have to actually transmit in a very objective manner the advantage and the benefits. Because going back to what we were mentioning, there's no time. We need everything that we can use to actually achieve those goals. And nuclear is just right in front of us. One of the best ways of trying to transmit these benefits to the society, to the public, when I came to Mexico and I started teaching in the university, it was the very first time I started teaching in an engineering program that was no nuclear engineering program. There's no such at bachelor's level a nuclear engineering program in Mexico. And when I started teaching them about the benefits, they actually got quite impressed about all these advantages. Some of them, one of the students actually, she became the president of the woman in nuclear chapter in Mexico. Some other students went to to make some internships, nuclear internships, and so on. So we actually have to educate the new generations, because sometimes they have this misinformation that nuclear is against renewables, which is not the case. And I don't know where the idea comes from. But it's a team. So we have to come in by public acceptance. We have to inform the people about the facts in an objective manner. Try to not being promoters, but being informers. And one of the best ways probably is using the Sustainable Development Goals that were actually stated by United Nations, I believe in 2015. To make the story short, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. From those 17, they want to fulfill them in 15 years to 2030. From these 17, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency,
yay.
Now I know I cannot use acronyms.
Yeah, you caught it.
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, 9 out of these 17 can be directly benefit with nuclear science and technology.
And that's huge, because these goals range everything from like poverty and hunger to clean water. Yeah.
It's huge. And I actually, personally, I believe that indirectly, it's more than 9.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this thing about the goals is so important. You just mentioned it. I think in 2000, United Nations also published the Millennium Goals. I might be mispronouncing the name, but the important point is that there were 8, if I'm not mistaken. Out of those 8, energy was not mentioned in any of them. And energy could actually help accomplish many of them.
Right.
Later, also in a United Nations conference, I believe some years later, a 9 millennial goal was included towards energy. Because it's so important how energy can help accomplish so many of our needs. But when we are talking about energy in general terms, we talk about quantity and then we talk about quality. Quantity. We need huge amounts of energy for the growing population, to improve the quality of life of many societies that are not at the same level of other societies, to actually avoid energy poverty, which is defined as the absence of access to modern energy services. So we need huge amounts of quantities of energy, but that's quantity. Now let's talk about the quality. We need clean. We need, of course, going back to clean, that is low carbon, no greenhouse gases. We need that is affordable. We need that is reliable. And we need that is flexible. So actually, nuclear covers all this. And going back to the point, it has to be a diversified, sustainable energy portfolio.
Right.
So what is the sense of having renewables and then the backups are all fossil fuels? So when the renewables are not blowing, yes, I turn on my gas power plant, my coal power plant, and so on. Why not using a clean base load energy like nuclear? Right. So those can be perfect, quantity and quality. But quality, this is what is the main problem of focusing on sustainability.
Right. And I want to touch on that because you've talked a little bit about some countries that are really good at finding this and using this source of energy that hits those 4 main goals, like in Sweden, where they're 50% nuclear and 50% hydro, or at least at the time that you were living there. So how do you actually transfer knowledge from countries who are succeeding in this goal to countries that are maybe falling behind in it?
Thank you. Thank you again for the challenge. I think these very experienced countries, I think the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is doing a fantastic and amazing job with this transfer of knowledge between the experienced countries and the newcomers. So the IAEA provides guidance, guidelines, and recommendations. These guidelines and recommendations are internationally accepted and reviewed. And they actually go through a very long process of matureness, reviewed by the most qualified experts. And so when a newcomer or country willing to interested in considering nuclear power goes to the agency. So that's a perfect bridge to get into this knowledge or experience transfer between the newcomers. It's very important to get the IAEA makes this in a great way, as well as other international institutions like the Nuclear Energy Agency from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where they create this networking or this platform of actually extending this recommendation guidelines proof of the most experienced advice. It's basically probably the best way of getting into this, getting this knowledge from these experienced countries. But of course, the experienced countries, they do have the responsibility of making these bigger steps.
Right.
So, because they have the knowledge, they have all these structure-based experience, as well as now that you mentioned how the newcomers get this knowledge. When the newcomers or a country considering nuclear, the best way is to get in contact with the IAEA. Actually, there's a great section, the infrastructure section, that has internationally accepted tools and methodologies to help this new member state get the idea, the facts that they need to consider nuclear within this sustainable portfolio. The decision is up to the government of the country. So it's not for the agency or for any international organization. It's up to the government of the country. And they need these facts, and they need to consider all this public acceptance, and they need to do it in a sustainable manner. Sustainability is also about informing people. Public acceptance is one of the pillars, considering this sustainable development, to well-informed people, so there's no barrier against developing the project. So it's not only economics, it's not only the regulatory part, the legal part.
Right.
Of course, it's not the technical part, but it has to do as well with the public acceptance.
Right. And speaking of the different parts, in terms of your career right now, what section are you focusing on, and what are you really trying to push right now in the nuclear field?
Thank you. I focus a lot in the infrastructure area. Within infrastructure, mainly I focus on the economics, the legal and regulatory framework. Of course, within economics, the funding and financing. And thanks to my last positions, I was actually the director of the Scientific Research Division at the National Institute for Nuclear Research. And before that, I was the distribution manager at GRS in Germany. So I have had this experience with executive and high-level manager positions where I have learned about the successful elements of a project. Within the National Institute, we actually, my main, so to say, homework, my main task, my main accomplishment was actually to design a strategy to bring all this external funding that in a country like Mexico is quite a big challenge. Right. And we actually increased exponentially the number of projects financed with external fundings. We actually created multi-disciplinary groups. Some people were hunting the calls for financial support, working with all the structure of the institute. We were helping the technical responsibles to prepare well-written proposals, well-done proposals to get this money. So I'm focusing a little bit also in capacity building with the academics. So mainly infrastructure and probably in these 5 points, this economics, the management part, the funding and financing, and capacity building with human resources. I like a lot to try to extend to the new generations these benefits, to close the links between the generations. Because actually, when I was at Westinghouse, Sweden, there were 30 years between me and the youngest specialist.
Wow. It's a huge gap.
I actually realized, I was thinking, because in between, the nuclear students we were very few. We were very, very, very few because of the unfortunate misinformation. Also, of course, the accidents that happened didn't help and so on. So there were just few nuclear students. And when I arrived and they were looking at me like, wow, probably there's a school tour or something like that. Yeah.
And so as we wrap up here, what do you think is our pathway to getting nuclear on the map on a global scale? What steps do we need to take to really ensure that we're getting the public support we need, that we're educating our younger generation, we're getting the governmental support that we need?
Thank you. I think it's quite a difficult challenge. It's quite a complex one. We have to understand that, first of all, we cannot focus just on a unique solution. Every country is different, and some countries might as well work perfectly with a huge, big nuclear power plant because the grid allows it, because they have infrastructure and so on. Some other countries might need smaller reactors because of the grid size, and maybe small modular reactors can also be good for lowering the capital cost. The part of the safety and regulatory is the same. There's many new designs in the world, and I'm very happy to see young generations working in these new designs. So probably this is part of the solution. We need to have a common goal, the sustainable development. We need to try to do our best to extend the benefits and advantages to the people based on facts, so they understand how nuclear is so important because there's not too much time. But on the other side, on the technical part, nuclear has to come out with successful projects on time and on budget. And this has to do by considering that that we don't need to have a unique solution. So regulated markets, unregulated markets require different approaches, big grids, small grids, and so on, the country size. And so it's a mix of including all these different infrastructure issues, I believe so, for this sustainable nuclear power program.
Federico, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for this unique space, and congratulations to all the team for this fantastic work that you are doing.
Thank you. Thanks for your work too.
Thank you.